Good evening. We are here live on the ground in the Kashmir Valley, reporting from Pahalgam, just a few kilometers from where terrorists struck in a horrific strike that has changed the destiny of Jammu and Kashmir forever and has brought India to the brink of war with Pakistan. As we are here in Pahalgam, you can see that what used to be a peak tourist moment is today virtually deserted. The Lidda River flows behind me. I've been speaking to the shawl sellers and the poniwalas. Each one of them is absolutely devastated. Several of them have very moving testimonies of how they saved lives on the day that the terrorists struck. But the big question now is how India will respond now that the Prime Minister has greenlit a military response saying that the armed forces have full operational freedom to decide on the mode, target, and timing of their response to Pakistan. Even as we speak, even as we're here on the ground, live from Pahalgam, India's Navy is almost eye to eye in a naval drill off the coast of Gujarat. Pakistan's Navy is reported to be approximately 85 nautical miles away. And the INS Surat has just docked in Surat as well. We don't know and we shouldn't know what's going to happen next, but we can talk about what has happened and what are some of the diplomatic challenges as India explores both kinetic and non-kinetic options. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Our focus today, as we report and come to you from the Kashmir Valley, live from Pahalgam, just a little distance away from where terrorists struck, is to look at India's options, both military and non-military. Some of these have already been deployed. The Indus Water Treaty has been held in abeyance till Pakistan changes its policy on terrorism. But the Water Treaty in itself does not actualize for a long time. And that brings us to what is known as kinetic actions, military options. What will India's military options look like? What will be the challenges? What will be the timing? To some of these questions, nobody should know the answers. But in a broader sense, we can explore the geopolitical ramifications, the security concerns, and what it means, what the country should brace itself for, even as a rattled Pakistan braces itself for a military response. In fact, one of its ministers did a middle of the night press conference to claim that this response was imminent. Let me introduce our very distinguished guests on the program today in this special broadcast from Kashmir. Our guest today will help us make sense of what has happened and what might happen. Veteran diplomat Ambassador Yash Sinha is with us. Welcome to the program, sir. It's great to see you here. One of India's best strategic affairs journalists, diplomatic editor with the Hindu, Suhasini Haidar is with us. Always a pleasure, Suhasini. And also joining me is former General Officer Commanding of the 15 Corps, General Atta Hasnain is with us. General Hasnain, I am right now in an area that has been your home turf for many, many years. And I know you'll speak with a lot of on-ground experience as we talk about what some of these military options might look like and what the security establishment might be concerned about. Let me actually start with you, General Hasnain. You know, the Prime Minister has greenlit the options, given the armed forces full freedom. But as emotional as we all feel, any military option has to be exercised with a calm head, a cool head, and with an end goal in mind. The earlier responses, the surgical strike after Uri and the Balakot strike after Pulwama, were localized to a single theater of conflict. There is some sense that we can't rule out a multi-sector conflict this time, but at the same time, India will want to calibrate on the escalatory ladder. How do you look at where we stand today? Are we, dare I ask, on the brink of war?
Thank you, Barkha. Thank you for inviting me to this program. Yes, we are in very interesting times, and you are standing at a place where I regret what happened on the 22nd of April. Oh, having said that, let's see what could possibly happen. And I think you covered it extremely well in your introduction when you said everything, but at the end you said nobody should know. It's not necessary for people to know what is going to happen. It's okay to discuss these things. The parameters the correct terminology is absolutely the parameters we should know. The nuances can be left to the experts, the professionals who have to execute them. The first point I want to say is you're absolutely right. Unlike Uri, unlike Pulwama, where it was a kind of a unidirectional kind of a strike that was done. This time, India has chosen to use the correct doctrine. This is hybrid war, and what India is launching or attempting to launch is counter hybrid war. Earlier, what we did was just a counter strike, nothing else. But this time, it is learning to do actually the entire gamut in taking the entire spectrum into consideration. The IWT, the Indus Water Treaty, has been taken into consideration. The banning of our flights, well, there's a counter with the banning of Pakistani flights, and Pakistan has a lot to fly to. They also like to go to Southeast Asia and places like that. They are going to get deeply affected by this too. There are similarly many other things, but the actual thing which everyone is looking at and hankering for is the kinetic, as you say very correctly. And I think it's important for all our countrymen to understand a couple of things. I have frowned upon any military man who has come online on the television programs to try and give his predictions, because there is no such thing as prediction in this. The Indian Army does not discuss its offensive operations in-house even. There's no question of discussing them outside. So the only issue is what types of things can be done. So that spectrum is there. We all understand what the kinetics are. We've seen it. It happened in Uri. It was the surgical strikes, which went about 1 to 2 to 3 kilometers beyond, 5 strikes beyond the line of control. They went primarily at terrorist infrastructure. After Pulwama, when we went for Balakot, again, it was against terrorist infrastructure, and it was an airstrike. What else could happen? There could be missile strikes, which could go against known terrorist hideouts, known terrorist concentration centers, etc. The million-dollar question which always arises here is, who is behind it? We always say that behind it is the deep state of Pakistan. Defining the deep state of Pakistan is fairly difficult sometimes, putting a finger as to who exactly. But you know that the Pakistan Army leadership, a part of the veteran leadership, a part of the ISI, a part of the terrorist leadership, all of them form a part of the deep state. It is the deep state which has to be affected. When you want to hit the deep state, obviously you have to hit kinetically at certain areas of their interest. That will evoke a response which could come against you into certain areas in our area, which will obviously evoke a counter response. And that is the trigger which starts off something much bigger. So what I'm looking at is essentially not a full spectrum kind of a conflict or things like that. I'm looking at what we have been always discussing in India for very long, a low intensity conflict, which could take place over an elongated period of time. And there is no time frame for it that it can. Lots of people are trying to guess 10 days, 12 days, 14 days. What I say is very clearly, this decision has been given. The time is in our choosing, and it can happen anytime in the future. Just remember that every time the Pakistan Army moves its reserves to its deployment areas, it goes through a certain penalty, economic penalty, right? A motivation and morale penalty. Keeps you waiting all the time. Let's keep anyone waiting. Let's see when the time is most appropriate. Remember, Indira Gandhi kept Pakistan waiting for 9 months. If you remember Sam Manekshaw's famous advice to the Prime Minister, not now, madam. It must happen at a time of our choosing when we are prepared. Let Pakistan wait for those 9 months, or even more if they have to wait.
Right. So you've made a very interesting point about a possible scenario where we could be looking at a low intensity conflict over a long period of time, which would, of course, also inflict economic costs on a Pakistan that is already struggling to survive. But General Hasnain, let me take this to Ambassador Yash Sinha, because your formulation, while very sound and I defer to it, makes one assumption that you can war game the Pakistani side with some degree of predictability. But the Pakistani state or the deep state is not necessarily a bunch of rational actors. For instance, we don't exactly know, Ambassador Yash Sinha, why why Munir, the allegation is that there is a direct connection between Asim Munir's very communal speech and the religious targeting that takes place a few days later. Has he done this, to get a new lease of life, with being beleaguered, losing control in Baluchistan? Is it to be relevant again because of the tensions around Imran Khan's arrest? How do you read it? And can we, taking a cue from General Hasnain's last point, can we, the Indian state, predict or plan this in a way that assumes a certain degree of rationality in the adversary's response?
Barkha, thank you for having me. I think I tend to agree with what General Hasnain has said, but I think we need a multi-pronged approach, and that's what we're adopting. And a good general, in any case, never reveals his plans or the timing. But as far as Pakistan is concerned, I'd like to believe that they are a rogue state. I mean, the link you drew between General Munir's speech and the action that happened on the 22nd. I mean, it's an obvious link to draw. Whether that precipitated or not is another matter. But the fact is that General Munir is facing a very uphill task. The country is facing an economic crisis. The most popular leader in Pakistan is in jail. The people are unhappy. And then, how best to deflect the people's attention? Do a kinetic action against India, and the people will unite against you because India will respond robustly, and that would unite the people behind the army. But I think that's a very simplistic, if that's what the General Munir thought, I think it's rather simplistic because there are many wheels within wheels, and I don't see this matter being resolved anytime soon, unlike Balakot or before that, Uri. So I think we need to be patient. We shouldn't be rushing the government's hand, and I think our armed forces will take the correct decision as and when they feel, and the type of what action they're going to take, what sort of kinetic action, that has to be very calibrated. I think the first steps have already been taken. I mean, the Indus Water Treaty, a lot of people say that, you can't stop the flow, so why did you do it? But I have been involved with the Indus Water Treaty. I was the co-agent for India during the interim measures passed during the Kishan Ganga arbitration when the redoubtable Fali Nariman was our lead counsel. So I'm aware of the obstruction at every stage that Pakistan puts up for run-of-the-mill projects on the Western rivers. But that is, again, just as one course of action that we've adopted. And time will tell us how that will affect Pakistan. The reaction in Pakistan has been uh, one of panic almost. And I think obviously, we're not going to be diverting all the waters of the Western rivers. We can't. But there will be action. Let the monsoon come. And I'm sure there will be other actions that we can take as far as the IWT is concerned. And as far as the kinetic action, I will, I think I will leave it to our generals and our admirals and our air marshals. I'm sure they'll do the right thing.
Right. I have several questions on the Indus Water Treaty, but I'll come to them maybe a little later in the program. Let me bring in Suhasini at this point. Suhasini, I mean, like me, you've spent a lifetime. This is our beat. But while there's deja vu, there's also something that feels very different about this moment. What, if you had to put your finger on that difference, how would you define it? And what do you think are some of the challenges? We already know the White House saying that Marco Rubio has dialed FM Jaishankar. He has also reached out to the Pakistani establishment. The Americans seemed barely cognizant of what had happened, and now they're doing their sort of predictable, oh, let's try and pull both countries back from the brink. How do you read what's happening?
Look, on the international diplomacy aspect, Barkha, I don't think there is another country that can tell India how to react to an attack like this. And particularly countries that are themselves involved, the US in its bombardment of Yemen, the free hand given to Israel. 2 years later, Israel is still supposedly taking actions in retaliation for October 7th. Russia's own operations in Ukraine. I can't imagine that any country, China's actions in the South China Sea, I can't imagine that there is any one of these major world leaders who can actually tell us that we should decide our course of action according to what they say. Yes, it is true that India too is guilty of this kind of telling others to indulge in dialogue and diplomacy, but not for ourselves. But I do agree with you, Barkha, that this attack has, in a sense, crossed a paradigm. It is different from the past. To begin with, there hasn't been an attack of this scale and magnitude which targets non-Kashmiri civilians, because unfortunately, a lot of the attacks inside Kashmir have ended with Kashmiri casualties. Here you are targeting non-Kashmiri civilians. I think the Amarnath Yatra in 2017 saw 8 people die on that bus attack. And not since, I think, the Mumbai attacks have we seen this kind of attack where people are identified and then executed almost. It's a particularly barbaric kind of act that has really shocked the nation. I think the intentions were threefold at least. One was to terrorize Indians. The second was to essentially crush the just blooming Kashmiri economy. And the third was an insidious one to create religious divides in the rest of India, as well as a response to what those terrorists did in that Pahalgam meadow in Baisaran. I think it cannot have come without some deliberation. This is not some young terror recruit who had just crossed a border, come back and carried out this attack. It was very well chosen, the target of the attack. And I think also the fact, while we have to eventually do our own investigations into how the attack took place, what were the intelligence inputs that were either disregarded or misunderstood, but I do think we also have to look at how these particular terrorists were exfiltrated. Why it is that a week later they have not yet been caught. And what was the actual aim? Because in the past we've seen Fidain attacks, Barkha, where the terrorists who come in are not expected to get out alive. They are expected to keep doing their terrorism, to keep killing people until they catch up with security forces, at which point they are killed. That's what's happened in the past, or the suicide bombings that we have seen, or the kind of attack in Uri that we have seen on security forces, Pathankot, you name it. We've seen these attacks in the past without this kind of situation where they are also taken out. There seems to have been some planning for that. I can't but, you asked the question, I can't but link what the Pakistani army chief said, because it was twofold to what we're seeing now. In terms of the fact that he spoke about the two-nation theory, spoke about the differences between Hindus and Muslims, but that he also spoke about Kashmir as a jugular vein, said, we have not forgotten about you, in a speech that came just 1 week. You know, everyone focuses on the speech he made in Parliament, but 1 week before that, he gave a very strong speech at the Joint Parliamentary Commission explaining what had happened after the Jafar Express attack in Balochistan. And over there, he had spoken about the lack of governance in Pakistan. So clearly there is a higher level of unpredictability coming from this particular Pakistani army chief than we are perhaps realizing over here. So I do think there has to be some kind of understanding of what we're dealing with across in Pakistan as well. But I do agree with you. I think this is different from the past. We need to study it as different from the past. And very quickly, if I may say, we talk about responses always comparing to Uri and Balakot. But actually, there are 5 responses that we need to look at. This is not a political act. When we think about a response to this kind of terror, it's not about one government over the other. So if we were to look at the 5, it would be what we did after the Parliament attack, which was the big mobilization, after the 2000 attack, where there were cross-border attacks that were not publicized, but at the same time, there was a lot of international pressure brought on Pakistan. You look at then the Uri attack and the response to that, which was a publicized cross-LOC strike. And you look at the difference when it came to the Pathankot attack, where we actually invited the Pakistani side to investigate inside our Air Force base at the time and to do a joint investigation of some sort. And then you look at the response really to to Balakot, where while we were ready with a very credible response and a missile and an airstrike on a terror target, we weren't perhaps as prepared for the counter response. And that's when you saw some of the miscalculations in terms of Captain Abhinandan bailing out into Pakistani territory or the shooting down of a helicopter. So I think we have to take all of these into account. None of these will be taken easily, these decisions. And I don't think they should be to a particular deadline or timeline.
Can you?
I think, in fact, when we talk about the difference, I see Barkha has frozen up. I've been meaning to ask you, General Hasnain, you've dealt at the LOC with so many different counterparts across in Pakistan. Do you see a difference between what we're seeing with General Asim Munir and some of the ones we had spoken to before?
Points were very also relate to this fact that I have witnessed Fidain from 1999 when it really started off, and in its intense period till about 2008, 2009. In all Fidain attacks, they came prepared to die and continued at the site in which they were fighting for a fairly long time. It happened in Uri. Of course, Pulwama was an IED strike. Any other place, the Parliament attack, or wherever they came to prepared to die. This lot did not come prepared to die. They came to strike, spent 40 minutes or whatever time they spent there, and after that made sure that they withdrew. Now, to my mind, this seemed to be the same group which has been primarily at the Pir Panjal range, in the up and down the Pir Panjal range between Doda and Poonch Rajouri, and was probably tasked. That's why my theory is that this group did not even infiltrate. It was facilitated because it is there. And for that, you need local support, which was there, obviously. Some kind of a local support was there, definitely. Now, as to the leadership part, the Asim Munir part, which you have brought out, I agree with you entirely. A very, very big change from Bajwa's time. Bajwa spoke different language. Every year, if you remember the Islamabad dialogue, wherever he spoke, he always spoke about something, the need for peace with India, and that's the only way that Pakistan could progress. Absolutely, absolutely. Asim Munir has never spoken that even once. From the day he has stepped in, he has virtually disagreed with his predecessor and his doctrine, right? And that is why this when you connect his speech and you connect the Jafar Express attack, the two of them, and you see in close proximity to them, this particular incident happening, you obviously realize that this was an attempted retaliation, so-called, because in their perception, Jafar Express was all something done by India as such. So I tend to agree with you entirely on what you have mentioned.
Sorry, everybody, I lost you briefly. The perils of being on the ground. I'm hoping you can all hear me, though.
Yes,
I'm back.
Absolutely.
Thanks for keeping the conversation going. I was able to listen to you, but somehow not able to join. But I heard everything that was said. And Suhasini was very interestingly saying that the benchmarks or the past precedents that we have are not only confined to what we did after Uri and the Pulwama terror attacks. Now, the point has been made about crossing a paradigm, but there's also another way in which we're seeing something different here on the ground, and that is the way Kashmir has responded. Perhaps not in 3 decades have we seen this kind of mass outpouring of anger, of compassion, black flags at Lal Chowk, here in Pahalgam. Every single local Kashmiri that I've spoken to, and several of them heroically helped to save lives, are using words like Black Day. One person here told me that he will mark this day every year as a Black Day, and he said it would have been better to kill us than to kill our guests, than to kill our mehman. So this is also something that is unfolding on the ground. I want to play out for you how one protester responded. He used the word, he was talking about POK. He said Azad Kashmir, but he was talking about POK. But he said attack POK. He said this is the time to go for POK. I never thought I'd hear somebody in Kashmir say that. Take a look at this.
हम तो कहते हैं, हम तो कश्मीरी साथ है मोदी की, अमित शाह से क्या अटैक कर लो, आज़ाद कश्मीर ले लो, हमारी एक ही साथ ये टेंशन खत्म कर दो. क्योंकि हमारे बच्चे भी आगे फ्यूचर बढ़ रहे हैं, उनका फ्यूचर बन रहा है, इस वजह से तो वो बच्चे बर्बाद हो जाएंगे सर। और मैं खास तो रिक्वेस्ट हिंदुस्तान के आवाम से करता हूँ कि गोदी मीडिया की बातों में मत जाओ, कश्मीरियों का इस वक्त हाथ थामो, कश्मीरियों को इस वक्त अपने हाल पे मत छोड़ो।
आपको लगता है कि एक बार की लड़ाई होनी चाहिए, एक बार?
ये एक बार ही खत्म करो सर, रोज रोज कहाँ पिसे, रोज रोज क्यों हम अपने हिंदू भाइयों की जान दे या मुसलमान भाइयों की जान दे, क्यों रोज रोज दे सर?
So हमारा हाथ मत छोड़ो, apart from the attack, POK feeling, which is that end this, have a final sort of determining, definitive military response, but don't leave our hand. These are important voices. General Hasnain, if you've been here a long time, did you think you'd hear a voice, so many voices like this, not a voice, but so many voices that we've heard on the ground as we have this time?
Barkha, I was preparing my response when I was hearing what you were saying. And I mentally went back to the year 2008, June, when the Amarnath Shrine Board agitation had started. I was, if you remember, I was in Baramulla that time. And I still remember the first stone of the stone throwing campaign was actually thrown on my car, virtually. Right? And the kind of hatred that existed there, there was a curfew which lasted 6 to 8 weeks almost. So those are very different times. I went back to Kashmir just 3 weeks ago. And I wrote something which could not get published because it somehow got obliterated by the events in Pahalgam. It was to be published on the 22nd morning, but it never happened. What I had mentioned was that I was surprised by what I saw in Kashmir. I went to Uri, I went to Baramulla, I went to Ganderbal, I went to Srinagar, and the areas around. I saw something strange in the eyes of the Kashmiris who I spoke to. I found a different kind of a hope. Now, my reading is a little different because I have been with these people for very, very long. I could understand from their language, and the language which was just being spoken by this young man who you spoke to. Obviously, there was a feeling of positivity. Things were happening, and at last, Kashmir was coming into its own. And I felt, in one way, my emotions were that this is unreal and this is dangerous. I actually wrote that I feel that Kashmir is in danger, because when you find this kind of normalcy coming around, you suddenly start wondering whether actually this is real. And that the next day the whole thing happened in Pahalgam. So you're 100% right. Kashmir has changed tremendously. And it's a question of how we treat it in this hour of need. We need not, I find a lot of media is focusing a lot on, no doubt, on the people who have suffered from this, but they need to also focus on all these candlelight marches, on the perceptions of the Kashmiris, the common man on the street, etc. None of them are feeling anything against India and against the Indian citizens. This should be highlighted to a greater extent, because otherwise you play into Pakistan's game plan completely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to, we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening on the ground in Kashmir, but I want to bring in Ambassador Yash Sinha, particularly on the Indus Water Treaty, with your hands-on experience on that, sir. Those who say that, somebody I was interviewing earlier said, "Wo to 5 saal lagega. It will take 5 years. We don't have the capacity right now to build the kind of dams that can really impact the water flow." How would you explain it in layman terms? What can actually be done at this stage beyond the very strong symbolic messaging?
Barkha, it's not a faucet that you turn on and turn off. You cannot turn off the waters of any of those rivers, particularly the western rivers. But you have projects, run-of-the-mill projects on the western rivers. For instance, you have the Kishanganga project, now the one that I was involved in the arbitration. You have the dead storage level of the water, which if you can always increase. It would take time. It will not take 5 years. It will take less. Then there are the sluice gates that are opened and shut. You can enlarge those sluice gates. Now, these are various options which I'm sure people better qualified than me, hydrological engineers, for instance, would be considering. But then for the medium and long term, you already have plans. There are existing plans on how to utilize or better utilize the waters of the Indus Basin. For instance, India, under the treaty, which is, in my opinion, a very unfair treaty, 40% of the catchment area of the Indus Basin lies with India, and yet we only get 20% of the waters. I think we were very generous to Pakistan, giving them 80% of the waters of the basin, in the expectation that it would be a gesture that would be appreciated, and there would be some reciprocity of goodwill from that side. But I don't want to get into the litany of failed attempts that we have done to try and make peace with Pakistan. But I think the time has come now to actually review what we have done in the past. And I would not get bogged down in technical, jargon about whether you can withdraw or keep it in abeyance or not, because, there is a Vienna Convention on Treaties, which clearly talks about good faith and trust, etc., and material change in circumstances. But I'm sure that, again, our legal experts would be looking at that. But I personally feel that this is an opportunity for us now to see how we can share the waters more equitably and benefit the people of Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab, where the rivers flow.
It is also important to mention that the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly has in the past passed a unanimous resolution actually asking for the scrapping of this treaty. So the sentiment against this treaty on the ground is also very, very strong. I want to, as we look at the human dimensions, and it has just been mentioned that to to further a Hindu-Muslim divide of any kind, to allow that to widen, to allow, for example, the kind of attacks we've seen on Kashmiri shawl sellers in Missouri, not just is it wrong, but it is also playing into the Pakistani hand. And today that message came from somebody who I think has shown enormous generosity of spirit in a moment of her own loss. We all saw the iconic image of the young bride of Vinay Narwal, a very young naval officer. They got married earlier this month. And today she gave this statement to the media. It really was heartfelt, and I really thought it was quite stirring. Take a look.
People going against Muslims or Kashmiris, we don't want this. We want peace and only peace.
Justice we chahiye.
Of course we want justice. Of course the people that have done wrong with him should be punished.
You are going to donate your blood today?
Yes.
All are. Happy blood
All of us are
family
going
members.
to donate.
युवा ने जो रास्ता चुना था देश सेवा का, क्या उस पे आगे बढ़ेंगे?
Yes, of course.
We want justice, but we want peace. Those who are going against Muslims, those who are going against Kashmiris, we do not support this. This is somebody who got married, went for a honeymoon to Pahalgam, where I'm sitting right now. Her image sitting with her killed husband, but just by her lap, her red bangle still gleaming in the sun, became the definitive image. And if she can say this with the calmness and the poise and the dignity that she can, I think everybody needs to take a cue from her. Anyone wants to just talk about what we just heard? I mean, there's not much to add. I think she's said it all, and then we can move on to what we think might happen next. Ambassador Sinha, you were wanting to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because you talked about the ground situation there, and General Hasnain was there a few weeks ago. In my capacity as CIC, I had actually gone in July 2023, and I found a sea change, and I was going after a decade perhaps, and I found a sea change in the attitudes of the people. There was a vested interest in peace, and I think this attack, people of Kashmir are seeing it as an attack on their livelihood. So that is why you have, of course, apart from the sympathy and killing of guests, etc., it's also the fact that their livelihood has been impaired badly. Because you're there and you probably have a better idea of how many tourists are there, but I don't think there are too many bookings happening right now. So I think that is another reason why people are upset. But I guess we definitely should cash in, and because the people of Kashmir should be behind us, and we must be very careful on how we react. And these isolated incidents you mentioned in Missouri and else, if there are incidents elsewhere, I think the law and order, the authorities should come down on a heavy hand, because we need unity right now. And I think the Kashmiri people are standing with us when we confront this menace of terror.
Absolutely. In terms of what's happening here on the ground, in terms of tourists, literally met about 2 tourists in all of Pahalgam, and they'd come after the attack to show their solidarity. They felt that they should find some way of saying that they're not going to be cowed down by terrorists. So there was that kind of symbolic gesturing. Otherwise, this place, you couldn't find room to stand at this time of the year. I want to, in last comments, now look ahead. Suhasini, we didn't talk about many things are happening simultaneously. Airspaces of both countries are close to each other. There is a line of control that is inflamed. There's a sense, it hasn't gone into mortar fire yet. We are still looking at small arms fire, but there's a sense that the ceasefire that has held through many conflicts could de facto end, and that would be the first thing that might happen. The navies of India and Pakistan are about 85 nautical miles away from each other. Drills, these are drills, I want to add. I don't want to create any sort of panic. These are drills, but the drills are this close to each other. So there's a lot happening. And every morning we wake up now to an army bulletin about firing across the LOC, firing near the international border along Akhnur and areas like that. Your response, what might be some of the challenges at this time, and in diplomatic terms as well, not just in terms of how to manage or how to calibrate the escalatory ladder?
Well, in terms of foreign policy and strategic policy that you would look at, obviously there are challenges, which is why one doesn't see an immediate reaction to such a horrific act as this one. To begin with, there are the challenges of just volatility. So the moment you're seeing the levels of firing increase at the LOC, although they're still about small arms fire at present, you're also going to hear about, there's a lack of trust. There's a huge amount of suspicion in both our forces on both sides. So you are going to see the possibility of some kind of miscalculation increasing. The second, as I said, is there is an element here which we haven't quite understood, which is what the Pakistan Army Chief is planning or has been planning, simply because we see these things come together, in the past as well with Kargil and other such events where a military general under pressure in Pakistan politically also then carries out attacks that are deliberately provocative. So that is the second kind of miscalculation or otherwise that we should really be thinking about. I think the third is something on our side as well. There is this, as General Hasnain said, this kind of idea that you can game an entire war and come out winning it in a television studio. But you need to be much more sensible about what your possibilities are. I hear very loose kind of conversations about cartological opportunities, about map making that can happen now. You had a gentleman on Kashmiri who said, let's just take all of Pakistan occupied Kashmir. These are not necessarily ideas that can be decided through crowdsourcing and public. So the idea of some kind of miscalculation on our side. The fourth, I think, which is a difference from the past as well, is this is the first such attack where we are contemplating a retaliation after the Galwan killings. And the idea that the Indian army chiefs have said for a while that we must prepare for a two-front war. Or a two-front situation is what they called it. You have a situation here where the Chinese foreign minister has spoken to the Pakistani foreign minister, and the statement that came from Beijing, mind you, this is not the Pakistani readout. The Beijing statement says China supports Pakistan's actions on counterterrorism. China supports Pakistan's right to defend its sovereignty. And China defends, Pakistan's. I think they used a certain term to basically mean that we will stand by Pakistan. I think that is a statement that we cannot take lightly. So if these are the 3 or 4 ideas that are in the mix right now, I think there is always a room for some kind of a challenge that could come to what is obviously a legitimate. There are legitimate responses that India can take. You can debate about what those responses are. Some may think abrogating or suspending an international treaty may have other repercussions. Some may think, having a visa ban, for example, is a basic. We've had it before. Airspace ban, we've done it before, both sides in 2019, and then that eventually goes away. The ceasefire, I think that'll be the first casualty the moment there is some kind of a military action, certainly from our side. But when it comes to military actions, you really have to collaborate. As I said, there is a lot of room for things going out of the planning as well.
I'm so glad you brought up China, because that was going to be my next question. And I also want to say that I fully agree with you that military matters aren't going to be dictated by social media, catchy headlines, and social, television channels, or the bombast of television channels. And I was, the clip of the man who was saying that, it purely interested me just in levels of sentiment. Not that I think anybody should take any kind of planning cue from what he said. But Ambassador Sinha, let's talk about China. It's a very important question, right? In the past, we have seen China block resolutions that India has tried to bring against terror outfits like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, blocking those resolutions against the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, which is the proxy political cover for the Lashkar. We have seen, as Suhasini said, China supporting this call for a so-called investigation, which of course India has said nothing doing. The worry about a two-front conflict, the worry about a kind of escalation at a point where Eastern Ladakh is heavily militarized, and even though there has been a rapprochement between India and China, I don't think India is ever going to, want another Kargil. So India is not going to take its eye off the ball in Ladakh. The China factor, if you want to speak about that.
I think it's important. We obviously have to keep a very close watch about what China says and does. But I think there are other issues where China and the larger global community are involved. Right now, we have, for instance, the United States and the tariffs that have been imposed globally or suspended for 90 days. But on China, those tariffs are about 145%. For them, I would think that would be far more important than trying and intervening in any potential conflict. However, I think we all know that they are so-called ironclad brothers or iron brothers, and we really need to be mindful of what China does. But I personally feel that China would be very wary in trying to intervene in a potential conflict militarily. Now, obviously, statements of support, actions, diplomatic actions, internationally and bilaterally, but there are other players too. I mean, let's not forget that there's a whole wide world there, and there's some important players who actually, if you recall, when the Galwan conflict happened or the incident happened, there was a lot of support that we got, including intelligence sharing, etc., from some of our other partners. So I think I would expect that that would continue. In fact, it would continue more robustly. And here I'm talking about our Western partners, particularly the United States. And while I'm saying that we cannot completely rely on support from, but there will be support forthcoming. And we will need to calibrate all that when we decide what sort of kinetic response we undertake in the future.
Right. General Hasnain, I'm going to give you the last word. You reminded us that Indira Gandhi waited for 9 months before Bangladesh was birthed, before the 1971 war, birthed that nation. My question to you then is this. Are you advising at this point that, and I think Suhasini, Ambassador Sinha have both made this point, that cool heads are needed, that passions are running high, but usually you end up making a mistake when you act militarily from passion. Passion might give a sense of josh, but not necessarily the best thought through clinical plans. Are you then saying, despite the public rage, it doesn't matter if this doesn't happen immediately? It is much better to think about what you want to achieve. What is the goal? Who is the target? What is the best way to succeed? What is the best way to prepare for a counter from Pakistan? And I should add that at this point in Kashmir, there is a massive manhunt on for the terrorists who did this. Those men have to be arrested. Those men have to be caught. One of them has been identified as Hashim Musa. Investigators say that he is a former army soldier with the Pakistan army who was either on loan or left and joined the Lashkar. Sketches of him have been released. These terrorists have not yet been caught. So last word to you. Sir, you're muted at your end, sir. Sir, you're muted at your end. Sir.
You cannot, Barkha, you cannot be insensitive to the requirement, to this environment and the situation in which we exist. So there will be demands on the government, there will be demands on the system that something must be done, retribution is necessary, and we must continue to keep that aspect in mind. Otherwise, you tend to lose the ground. You know, the groundswell of support is very, very important. And in this kind of condition, we have to balance out the sentiment with the reality. That's number one. Number two, both my colleagues, both my fellow panelists, surprised me completely with their depth of strategic knowledge. They both seem to know military strategy better than me. Very, very, I'm surprised how well they have covered this subject so beautifully. I'll only introduce one word for them to consider taking home, and that is posturing. You see, military posturing is a very important aspect. What you may not expect a two-front war, but you can definitely expect two-front posturing. You may find a move. What happened? 2020 and 2025 are quite different. The strategic environment of the world is diametrically opposite today. So the Chinese may not come at you militarily, trying to peg you down and things like that, but they will posture. They will do something here and there, which will be to the advantage of Pakistan. What we are doing at the moment, today's news are Southwestern Command carrying out certain maneuvers, the Navy doing some maneuvers. This is all posturing. And as a part of the build-up, posturing is a very, very important aspect, which will continue for quite some time, and it will sort of contribute, it will assuage much of the sentiment on the ground at the moment, but I don't think that it will immediately result in action. And I hope it doesn't, because I am, for one, will not want knee-jerk reactions. I would like straight-cut objectives. What are your political objectives? What are your military objectives? These should be clear-cut in our mind, and we should achieve them at the end of it. This is what happened in 1971. We were very, very decisive about this. And that is why I started this whole discussion with that 9-month wait, which was so important to the outcome of the war. This is what we have to also ensure in terms of the outcome of the situation at the end of this particular phase.
Learned a lot from all three of you. I think I am the one staggered by the depth of knowledge here. I feel like a student back in, studying conflict reporting and conflict management. Thank you so much. I think what we can summarize is the following. The three of you do agree that whatever happens next cannot be as a result of populist sentiment, as understandable as that sentiment is, and no government can afford to ignore public sentiment. But to actually deliver justice, to actually deliver effective justice, you have to think this one through. Non-military options, the Indus Water Treaty, Ambassador Sinha explained, what can be done in the short, the medium, and the long term. Suhasini and General Hasnain have gone into other dimensions. And I think it's sufficient to say, and I will add this from the ground, that Kashmiri after Kashmiri who has stood against this terror attack is also saying to the rest of India, don't leave our hand. Don't leave our hand. Don't leave us alone. And I think that is also a sentiment to respect and empathize with at this point. I will sign off from on the ground here in Pahalgam, saying thank you to Ambassador Yash Sinha, to General Hasnain, and to Suhasini. Haidar. Hope to talk to all three of you again very soon. Thanking our audience, and do keep watching The Mojo Story for more ground reports, interviews, analysis, and learnings in educative programs like this one. Thank you, take care, and see you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.